race fans, this edition of Through the Gears presented by Frontstretch. I'm your host, Tino Pattigno, and I couldn't be more excited to get back into the NASCAR racing and betting action for this weekend at Darlington Raceway for the Goodyear 400 as it's throwback weekend. I got my throwback merch on for this one, and before we get into everything there, we have to talk about Kansas Speedway and the closest finish in NASCAR Cup Series history. We cashed out with Kyle Larson. Martin Truex Jr. top 5 was right there as well, and he was in position for the win as well. So we were right on the money as we made a lot of money in that race. Noah Gragson top 10, Chase Elliott top 5. I'll be honest with you guys, that was one of my better days from a full betting card standpoint. Although Martin Truex Jr., if he would have won, it would have been a bigger payout. But at the end of the day, to witness history like that, to witness such a great race throughout that entire day at Kansas, and to cap it off with a bunch of wins, you couldn't ask for anything better than that. So that, to me, was very special. And I hope you guys followed along, tailed along, and was able to share the same success from a betting standpoint if you did tune in to Through the Gears last week. And for this one, we got a great show in store for you. We're going to be talking to my man, Derek Yoder, throwing it back to our first ever episode here with me as the host and Derek as the guest. You'll be seeing him now live on the screen as we go through the gears and talk about everything that you need to know for this weekend at Darlington. Before we get into that, gotta give a special shout out to my man Kyle B8. Kyle Busch ran very well at Kansas, and I think he's going to like to hear what we have to say about him for Darlington in this one. Shout out to Mr. Hartman and all the groomsmen as well out there who followed along with the bets and were able to cash it by following along Through the Gears and watching this video and supporting me each and every week. It means a lot to me there. If you guys have any comments or anything that you want to share, comment down below. Follow along with the Frontstretch Podcast Network. Be sure to like and subscribe so that we can interact, as I love being a part of this NASCAR betting community and hearing what you guys have to say. So without further ado, let's go through the gears. Now joining us as we go through the gears is the one and only Derek Yoder. Derek, thanks again for joining us. It is throwback weekend. It is Darlington. I got my throwback shirt on, and we're throwing it back to you here because you were our first ever guest on my show of Through the Gears. So how's it going? And how are you ready for Darlington this weekend?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me back on. I'm glad that I was able to make an appearance again, a recurring guest, as I like to call the people over on the NASCAR Betting Preview Show. So I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to Darlington. It's one of my favorite races. This whole stretch of Dover, Kansas, Darlington, Charlotte is the ultimate stretch when we talk about high tire wear, racing. What we saw last week, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But yeah, I'm pumped. So thanks again for having me on.
Of course. And I'm so glad you mentioned those stretch of races, because not only is it exciting, watching it on TV and the racing product that it brings and seeing potentially different winners and everything that is those tracks and what makes them special. But from a betting standpoint, too, you got to be excited. You got to be tuned into the NASCAR Betting Preview Show. You got to be tuned into Through the Gears and make the most money possible during this time. So when we think back to great races, I can't help but remember last weekend at Kansas and the closest finish in NASCAR history. I need to know what you thought when that was happening and all going down. And then tell us a little bit if you had any bets on the line as well.
So what I was thinking when that was happening was it was interesting. So I had on one screen, I had the inboard camera of Larson. On another screen, I had the telemetry of how they were running at that moment. Wow. And then the TV is on another screen, and that is like a minute, maybe 30 seconds back. And so when I saw everything happening, then my eyes are shifting towards who's winning, who won, what's happening, what's this finish, listening to it on the radio as well. And it was crazy. I was hitting my wife to the side of you won't believe this. This is crazy. Because I remember showing her and the kids when the Atlanta race happened live. And this is a 3-wide finish. We didn't think we'd see that again. Well, this is the closest finish in NASCAR history. So I didn't have a Buescher ticket. So I was very thankful with that, where I know a lot of people were able to get in on him. I was actually talking with Chris Wormy on his pre-race poll. Right before the race started, I threw a comment to him hey, I wonder if Fords are going to be a little bit better than we anticipate, given the cooler conditions and the nighttime atmosphere. when it's super warm and super hot, Toyota thrives. So the cooler it was getting, I was like, I wonder if there's a player. Well, I didn't anticipate. Nobody did after looking at the practice metrics of Buescher. So it was wild, man. It was a lot of fun to watch as a fan. It was a good day betting as well. So what about you?
No, yeah, I mean, I will say, oh, first off, your setup sounds awesome. Like that, like the going from
Dude,
the in car to the yeah. Everyone tuning in, that is peak right there. I gotta step it up a little bit because I'm just on the TV. I'm just watching on the TV. Maybe I got a tripod next to me. It was funny too because you mentioned like letting the kids and the wife know everything that's going on.
Oh,
I was home
man.
alone. If someone was with me, they'd probably be hearing me scream as loud as I did. So that was funny too. I had the tripod set up, recording my reaction and everything like that. And it was crazy because, so talking about me from a betting standpoint, I had Martin Truex Jr. He was my favorite play of the weekend going into it. Yeah. Oh, there we go. And it's crazy because although I also did have Kyle Larson, but we know the difference of values. Truex was, I got him at 11-1. And then Larson was plus 350. So from that standpoint, with about 8 to go, when Martin Truex Jr. was going to blow by Denny Hamlin for the lead and ultimately win that race because he had so much better tires than Hamlin did on that run, I was freaking out then. And then the caution comes out and I was really upset. And then Kyle Larson comes back, Truex top 5, Chase Elliott top 5, had Gragson top 10. So in the end, with the closest finish in history and hitting on all those plays that I did get to, wasn't as big of a payout as it could have been with Truex, but ultimately, I mean, got to witness the. And here's another question I have for you before we move on: is this your favorite race of all time? Because I'm having trouble thinking that it's not for me. Like with everything that would happen betting wise. I mean, I have to factor that in personally because that just makes me even happier. But also closest finish, seeing the amount of lead changes or battles for the lead that was like, to me, I think this has to at least be top 3 for me all time. What about you?
I would say top 3 is probably it. I mean, I've been watching since 98, so I got a couple races up there. I actually would say that was not the best race of the year.
So then Atlanta?
Bristol.
Oh, wow. I like
Bristol,
that, though.
Bristol was my favorite race. My favorite race in a long time because of how like the teams were so confused and trying to figure out the strategy on the fly. It gave us at home, the viewer, just the opportunity to sit back. I mean, like you watch a football game, right? And it's like these guys are struggling and you just get to watch. You just get to sit back and be like, these are professionals. And so watching Bristol was so cool because the comers, the goers, the guys that were just, I mean, the leaders just weaving in and out. So I actually like Bristol more than I like Kansas. But being able to say to a new fan, I want to sit down and show you a race, I'm going to show them Kansas 10 out of 10 times.
I like that. And I really like that answer too, because that's like, okay, this is the awesome part about this season is you can say Kansas, you can say Bristol, you can say Atlanta, maybe even Daytona. If you're getting crazy, it's the Daytona 500. It was okay. It was crazy. Like, but the fact that we have 3 to 4 races this season that could potentially be your favorite race of all time, like to me is so awesome. And I think this season, I mean, I've been watching for a long time, but not as long as some other fans out there, obviously. But in terms of like best seasons ever, I think this, at least with what we're 12, 13 races in now, this might have to be in the conversation with the amount of all-time races we have had in one season, closest finishes, racing product, and especially for one that's storylines, Larson versus Hamlin, Hendrick 40th anniversary, Joe Gibbs Racing turns it on. The fact that it's been this dominant between HMS, MJGR, and it's still an awesome season really hypes me up, if you can't tell. And I think the fact that if you guys are tuning into this show, I'm gonna have a tweet out with a poll asking people, could this be the best season, or is this right now the best season ever? Obviously a long way to go, so I'm being realistic, but I want you last thoughts on this season topic here. Could this be right now like the best season ever to you, just based off the racing product that we've seen already?
I would say that it has been the most compelling.
Okay.
The product needs a lot of work on the road courses and short tracks.
Okay.
So
and that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, that's a big part. I mean, they got lucky at Bristol because of, having the tire wear not wear and the resin effect there. And then, but Martinsville is kind of what we thought it would be. And that wasn't great. And then Coda was not anything special. When you take out places like Auto Club, when you take out places like Chicagoland, when you start removing dates, like Kentucky's not even there. What do you do with Texas? So when you start taking out some of those tracks, like that really puts an emphasis on, okay, well then how's this product going to look at some of these other places? Because there's only one Las Vegas, one Charlotte, one Homestead, and one Darlington.
Those are
pretty
all that
damn
should have
good
two.
tracks.
Yeah,
They are. Pocono only has one. So like this car is great on the intermediate, and it is probably the worst it's ever been on super speedways, terrible on short tracks, and now it's like not a great product on the road courses. So that's a pretty large chunk of races. So I think this part of the season's been great. That's why I think this stretch of races, Kansas, Darlington, Charlotte, are just going to be phenomenal, and it's going to help the viewership. It's going to help the fans. It's going to help your followers on Through the Gears with the betting aspect. So it's got me fired up.
Let's go. All right. Now that we're fired up here still, and I love the insight too and analysis, because everything you said, definitely agree with super speedways especially. So hopefully, the product comes into play there, but we're in a good spot now. And especially when we look ahead to Darlington here, this is one of my favorite tracks, I think, because just the uniqueness of it, the fact that you can have tracks that are deemed, veteran-esque, like that you need to be experienced to perform well, much like Richmond. I feel like New Hampshire is also a little bit like that. Tire wear is going to be a factor, like you mentioned. Is there anything that you consider heading into Darlington from a betting standpoint that we need to know about?
I would say that really dive into understanding at the very beginning. So the qualifying order is huge. Like who's in what groups, because we've seen already this year, Group B typically has a little bit more of an advantage than Group A does. And I think we're going to see that again this weekend. So if you're ever able to look at a matchup and say, okay, this is a Group A versus a Group B, especially in qualifying, that is how I look at things a lot. A lot of those pictures, and especially at a place like this where, getting on and off pit road is very key. So if you have a guy that's been struggling throughout the year, Kyle Busch has been struggling at times, Ross Chastain's been struggling, like that weighs into my mind a little bit, even though we can't predict it, but we can't predict what's going to happen on lap 3 either. So I just have to weigh those things a little bit more. That's some of the out of the box thinking. The pit strategies are massive, like understanding any of your followers and listeners, I highly recommend. I was just doing it here at home. I went back and I watched the Goodyear 400 from last year, not the Southern 500, because there's a whole another beast with 100 more miles, but the Goodyear 400, and understand, okay, on this lap, these teams were starting to pit. Oh, well, now knowing that I'm in the future of that, where that race was, I now know who's been doing well this year. So just identifying that and understanding, making sure you know what strategies are, because it's going to help the live betting aspect a whole lot more.
Definitely. And I think that's a huge point in differentiating the two races there. And I also completely going hand in hand with what you're saying too, is track position is so key. So if you make a mistake on pit road, if like you mentioned, Kyle Busch, Chastain, if they're struggling to getting into their stops, speeding on pit road as well, could absolutely ruin their day. And I think trusting the pit crews that have been doing well so far this season is key. And I think perfect time now for the odds breakdown, because two of the best pit crews I feel like all season have been the 5 team of Kyle Larson, even better probably the 11 of Denny Hamlin's. His when people ask me what makes Denny so great this season, I honestly say the pit crew, because he can trust them very exactly. And the crew chief too. I mean, Chris Gabehart's been awesome. They're the most complete team, and that's why they're the two favorites heading into this weekend as well. Larson at DraftKings specifically is plus 380, Hamlin's plus 450. And before we go a little bit further than that, I want to know what you think about these two guys, not only heading into this racetrack, but so far this season, because the biggest storyline has been Denny Hamlin has won 6 times against Kyle Larson in 1 and 2 overall finishes there. Like he's beat him every single time. And to see the driver Kyle Larson is no hate against Denny Hamlin. He's obviously great, but Larson is Kyle Larson. He takes my breath away sometimes watching him race. We've seen it at Kansas. We see the moves he's able to. Exactly. So to you, heading into Darlington, trying to pick a winner out of these two, if we are going to do that now, if they're 1-2, who wins it between Kyle Larson or Denny Hamlin in this one, and why do you think so?
I would say Larson does. I think
Mm.
Larson just comes in. So it would have been interesting, right? Last week, Larson beat Buescher by 0.001. Well, who's right behind them, not too far back, would have been Hamlin. I mean, Hamlin
Mhm.
is a guy that has been finishing well, but Larson is just a little bit of a different breed. And I think that momentum aspect is a huge role. Now, yes, he's got the Indy 500 coming up, but we can worry about that next week when you're doing your show. But for if I were to say, hey, I know last lap they're going to come down and they're going to be side by side going into one, I'm going to say Larson wins that because I think Larson's kind of done with the whole mantra of, you've lost to this guy 6 times when you finish second, he's won. Did you know that? And you guys are friends. I don't think that happens again.
Yeah, I think now that he's heard people, now that like people are bringing it up
Yeah.
more and more,
Yeah.
like I think Dover was the final straw because honestly, that,
Yeah.
like I'll admit, I did not know it was 6-0 Denny until after Dover happened, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? And Denny's been more aggressive though, so it kind of makes sense. Like Denny is put, at Pocono specifically was one where he bumped Kyle out of the way. There's a few other times where Denny has just been able to get past Larson, where I feel like Larson's been a little more clean. So if we see that happen again, especially at Darlington too, like I don't really love the plus 380 number. This is one that, if we're talking from a betting standpoint now, probably going to wait on both of them until after practice and qualifying, just because if they put up, a 10th place or outside of the top 10, we can see that number increase value wise. But I guess in terms of, out of those two guys, I can see Kyle Larson being the first driver to win back-to-back races so far this season, especially with the momentum, like you said. And then one driver who we did mention earlier that should have potentially won last week, Martin Truex Jr. He's plus 700 right now. I love this number as a midweek right now. He hasn't qualified that great, I feel like, consistently so far this season. What do you think about him? And, William Byron's right next to him at plus 750 as well, but I feel like MTJ's got to be the play in this one.
I would say Martin's always so good here. Doesn't always have the finishes, but he's so good here. So I would say if you're going to bet a number, I like that one.
Okay. No, that's good to know because that's something that I was thinking about in terms of, our odds breakdown. And I guess looking further on the list before we get into our outright winners as well and really placing those bets in, looking from a value standpoint, people are talking about Chris Buescher. They're talking about him and Brad Keselowski as well. If you're tuned into the NASCAR Betting Preview Show, they were talking about a bunch. Dale Earnhardt, all the rest of the guys as well that were on. And I do get the mindset, and I do like it. They're both. So Brad right now is plus 1,600. Buescher plus 1,800. The Fords and Blaney plus 2,500. Logano plus 2,000 there as well. So the thing that concerns me a little bit here is I was thinking about, the Fords, and I was thinking about how much they've been struggling. But we saw at Kansas that maybe it's actually been turned around. But was that just Chris Buescher, or could we also see the rest of the Ford drivers really start improving here at Darlington?
Yeah, so we'll talk about a play I'm on already with Chris in a minute, but I'm not sold on Ford as they're back by any means.
Okay.
I mean, Gragson ran well, but I think he was like the only Ford that ran well at Vegas, and then last week he was pretty strong, but Chris Buescher just had a different gear that no other Ford even had. Now, at the end of the race last week, Brad, who I had a head-to-head matchup on Buescher. So the last 2 weeks at Dover and Kansas, I've been on Buescher over Brad both times, plus money. Taking that. And if they post that ever again, I just take that. But last week, Brad was bad fast, so I was happy that the caution came out because I think Brad would have passed Buescher in those closing laps. But I think that had to do more of temperature, cooler temps for Ford, which benefits them, and that's something. Just putting your feather or a feather in your cap for Charlotte, because when they goes from day to night, I think that's when we start seeing the Fords a little stronger. So if you have like a stage 2 or stage 3 bet, maybe side with the Ford side and figure out if you can get a little plus money. That's down the road. But I'm not sold on Ford yet. They would have to show me some stuff this week where I'd be like, okay, maybe they got something. But as of now, I'm going to say no.
I like that because the value's there, and that I feel like could entice people to put a bet down on them or some money on each driver there, because not only are they key names, but they're racing with value for team like Blaney, Team Penske, Logano as well back there, and or at least Logano's won at this track. Blaney's fared okay, nothing crazy out of him. But switching over to our outright winners now, because we've talked about it, we've previewed who's going to be good, we've checked out the odds. who's the first driver when you looked at the odds this week? You said, all right, I got to lock in the bet on him.
Well, I mean, I think one of the first guys that holds some value is Chase. He's been a guy that's been red hot these last few weeks, and I mean, he finished runner up here last year, so it's not his first time in being. I mean, him and Martin Truex a couple years ago, I believe it was 2020, battled in the closing laps where they were going into turn one and both wrecked each other. We saw even in 2020 where him and Kyle Busch, where when the series came back on May 17th, and he got spun from, I think it was third, and where he, flicked off Busch going in the turn one when everybody was coming back. So he's put himself in really good position at this track. And for him, one of the hottest guys coming in from a odds perspective at 16-1, if you can find that number, that's a really good range with you guys like Chris Bell at 12-1, Ross at 15, Chase at 16, Busch at 16-1. If you're to say, I'm going to start my card with those four, and I'm going to figure out how to, your whatever your unit allocation is, but that's how you're going to start your card. I think one, if not two of those are going to be in contention late in the race.
I love that. And I definitely agree. That Chase Elliott number is awesome too, because once it gets closer to the race weekend and people see that, right? If anyone's tuning in, watching this now, hopefully you're tuning in early, right when Through the Gears comes out, because this is the time. Like this, I feel like these next couple of days here are when you guys should place the bets, because that's when the value's on the board. And like I was mentioning, especially a guy like Chase Elliott, fan favorite. When people see that, they're going to jump on it, and his number's going to go down from what we see 13-1 right now, probably down to 8 or 9. I could see, especially after practice and qualifying. One driver you mentioned that I love that you did was Kyle Busch. Right now, I'm seeing him at a plus 1400, 14-1 to win it, and I love him so much because I said it all year. People would ask me, "Oh, he's 15-1, he's 16-1. Should I bet?" I'm like, no, he hasn't proved it to me. No, RCR's been not good. The last few weeks for Kyle Busch have been good. And Austin Dillon hasn't, but that's fine, because if Kyle Busch is doing whatever it takes to make that team and make his car better, that's what I love to see. Dover was a step in the right direction. Kansas, he was literally in position to win, and also caution comes out, but then he spins him. He was the caution. That was the crazy part, and then he goes from 20th to 8th or something like that at the end. To me, I like Kyle Busch with momentum, but also. I feel like a determined, maybe mad Kyle Busch, because I don't think he wanted to spin out. I don't think he wanted to be that caution. He was going to finish top 5 for sure. Is that a mentality you have looking at Kyle Busch right now, who's also one of the best drivers, I think, that can rip the boards, rip the fence, run the high line? Obviously there's the Larsons and the Denny's, but I mean, Kyle Busch at Darlington, I feel like that's a number and a play early on this week that people may forget, especially with how bad RCR has been this year. I feel like he's under the radar, and that's surprising to say for Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I think the turnaround for Kyle was the backup car at Texas, which, believe it or not, is kind of a crazy thing, because he said, and his crew chief even said after the race, like, good luck. Like, we're not going to be competitive. We'll have trouble even getting the car to pit road before the race starts, because they had Austin Hill in the race. So that was 3 RCR cars. Now they were going to a 4th, and we know how backups have been in this Gen 7 era. So the fact that they were able to get to 10th that day and then just kind of carry that momentum, looked really good, scored the pole at Dover. I think this is a guy that you're going to have to bet on now to get that price point. Just do the outright. Worry about the props and all that later, because if Larson continues to hold the market, so does Hamlin, and they're inside the top 10, prices aren't going to be shifting a whole lot. I mean, we even saw it at Dover when he was on the pole. I think he was like 14-1 or something like that. So we're not going to see much shift if those other two guys perform well in practice and qualifying. So I like the Kyle Busch play. I feel like we're all now starting to trend back that way, which when those things start happening and everybody's like, I'm in on this, I try to reverse that and go the other way. But we're not all there yet, but I think we're getting close. So I'll be curious to see what happens Saturday in practice and qualifying.
Yeah, that'll be big. I would hate if he leads us on like this and then has the stinkers. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think
he's a guy that's had a lot of pit road penalties this year.
And his pit crew has been untrustworthy. Same thing with Martin Truex Jr. So great segue here too, because I feel like for MTJ, I feel like his value of plus 700, who we alluded to earlier, that might be my favorite play right now, which is weird to say, but I feel like it's not, because
Safe.
I think that number will be, it's a safe value play. But him and Kyle Busch, if they have something in common this year, I feel like it's the fact that their pit crews consistently have let them down. Is that something or how major of a thought is that when you are placing your bets in this one with those two drivers potentially?
With the pit road elements, is that what you're?
Yeah, or the pit crew specifically, in terms of how they've sort of let them down, or the biggest thing that stands out to me is how I had a bet on MTJ to win at Richmond. And then Denny Hamlin's pit crew just put up a blazing fast stop, and MTJ's didn't, and then it snowballed.
So there's a little heartache there. I see where you're going with that.
Maybe it's a little too personal for me.
You're still that's still a personal thing. I don't weigh a ton into, like, it's not like I'm going to say I'm going to or I'm not going to bet on a guy. Even if Chase Elliott, who has a really good pit crew, would be matched up with somebody that even has a pit crew like Kyle Busch that maybe isn't as elite, I don't factor that in. I think those kind of things, you're maybe getting too into the weeds. Now, when we go to other series like Xfinity or Trucks, and like they would last year, where you knew, okay, hey, Parker Kligerman's team, their pit crew was terrible last year. If you're able to get in a head-to-head, you bet against him. But when no pit crews or no stops are happening like that, and it's, hey, just whenever you come in, you can go out the same way. Those are different scenarios, but we don't have those in Cup. So I don't weigh that entirely, but I know there's a lot more buzz about those elements now. So this will be an interesting week with the more of the driver than it is the crew getting on and off the pit road.
I like that. That's good to know. So I think going off of the driver standpoint now, we touched on Chevys, we touched on, I guess we did talk about a little bit Toyota with Martin Truex Jr., but I want to make sure we are on the same page here, or at least could be, in terms of your favorite Toyota driver to bet on this week. I want to highlight them because I feel like we talked about it too, where it's been Hendrick Motorsports versus JGR, right? And maybe 2311 in there a little bit with Tyler Reddick and a Talladega. And Tyler Reddick has been one of the top 4 drivers, I would say, so far this season in terms of versatility and winning on any track. And here you go, Darlington, he can run the high line almost better than anyone else, or up there with the best. Toyota drivers, Toyota values, we see Denny Hamlin plus 450, Reddick plus 900. Can't forget about Christopher Bell at plus 1200. Out of all them, is there? Yeah, is that it? Bang! Let's go.
Everybody's sleeping on Bell. And I think that's a mistake. And I know last week he scored the pole, didn't look great. Once the race really started, I wonder how their car was set up for daytime versus like cooler nighttime conditions that we saw. But I feel like this is a guy that just needs a little bit more momentum to come back. I mean, he's actually been handling it extremely well and not like passing it off where walks in the media center. Hey, just so everybody knows, my name's Chris Buescher. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris Bell, and I drive the 20. And so, like, he's joking about it in that way, which is great. I think he's almost like one of those animals that's gonna just attack here in a minute.
I like that.
And I think that could be this weekend. Yeah.
Yes. And because I feel like here's maybe something that I want to, maybe you agree with or not, but I like the fact that you mentioned the attack part, because especially when he is, maybe we'll call it a slump. He's had some tough races. He got back into it at Kansas, but did fall all the way back from the pole. So my question is here, do you agree that Christopher Bell is a driver where it's like, if some people are sleeping on him or maybe not considering him to win, that's when he does win? Like, I feel like that happened to me earlier this year, where I was like, I was at Phoenix and I was thinking Tyler Reddick, I was thinking, Ryan Blaney, those types of drivers, Denny, and then bang, Christopher Bell wins it. So I feel like this is a perfect spot for that. You got to agree with that, right?
I do. And Phoenix is a great example because he had one of his lowest moments in his NASCAR Cup Series career where he finished last in the race of the championship race. And obviously there's a lot of hype momentum built for that day alone. And then to finish last, then come back the next, couple months later, 3 months later, and get a win. That's huge. So we've seen this before. And we know the 20 team has we know JGR has a lot of speed. Toyota has a lot of speed. It is going to take Larson and Hamlin not necessarily being in the mix for whatever reason, and Bell asserting himself that day of like, okay, I'm a top 5 guy, I'm a top 3 guy, got that speed. I don't think that that's far-fetched at all. So Truex and Bell are my 2 favorite Toyotas that I feel quite comfortable with saying out loud on your show.
Awesome. So those tuning in, make sure you write that one down, especially for the values on both of them. Just to reiterate, MTJ plus 700, love that. And same thing with Christopher Bell. I mean, plus 1200 if he gets the pole again, which he is known to do.
Yep.
I feel like last year he rattled off like 2 or 3 poles in a row.
Yep.
This number is going to go down. Thank you, Derek, for this one, because he was a driver I wasn't considering. So you may have put me on to see Bell and his comeback story this weekend. All right, as we continue to get through the gears, if you will, and through the betting board and everything we got going on there. Some prop bets now. Is there anything you're taking a look at, whether it's top 3, top 5, top 10, crazy stuff, manufacturers, head-to-heads, any of these race props that you see that really catches your eye in this one?
Yeah. So when I look at a race like this, because it's more driven or driver centric, where the driver has a larger part to play than anywhere else, I really look at matchups. So I like fading guys right now, like a Ryan Blaney. So depending what matchups are out there on him, I know there's Chris Buescher on Caesars has them at minus 115 a piece. I like the Buescher side there. I don't want to start falling in love completely with Buescher. I am on a Buescher head to head on him versus Bubba Wallace, and Bubba Wallace has some good numbers here. He scored the outside pole last year at this race and hung in there until his pit crew had a little bit of an issue. And he's a guy right now that's not trending in the right direction. Bubba, I'm talking about. So I'm trying to fade Bubba where I can as well. And like I said, that just happened to be another matchup with Buescher, and that was on Bet 365 when we talked about that last night. And it's still there at minus 115 a piece. So I like the Buescher side in that one. Really trying to find guys early on. I mean, I'll wait for stage bets. Stage bets have been my favorite market to bet. They've gotten a little wonky here the last few weeks, but traditionally those have been producing some really good numbers. My card over the last, I want to say, month now has remained extremely light going into practice and qualifying. It's only after practice and qualifying I start loading up the card and just being methodical where I'm going to put some of my investments. Since I live in a live betting state, I have that ability. So I love the matchup game. I love it. Is there any driver that you found or that you're going to fade this weekend at all?
Ooh, a fader. So I'm glad you asked that, because one driver I was going to ask you about what you thought. So I'll lead into this one. Is Eric Jones. Eric Jones is coming back from the injury. Yep. This is, if not his best track, one of his best tracks. I mean, he literally has 2 wins here, and it's awesome to think that because it's one of the hardest tracks on the schedule. So good for Eric Jones, but I just can't see him. He's plus 110 for a top 10. So this was my question here, because it was like, I love that value, and especially normally with Eric Jones, seeing his success at this track, I would bet that for plus money for this driver sort of could be overlooked. But with he hasn't gotten a top 10 all year. B, Legacy Motor Club also hasn't been good all year, and also he's coming back from the injury. I just feel like I can't bet on him in the first race back. I just can't. Even at plus 110, I just feel like that's not a good enough number to intrigue me. I would have honestly liked to see like a plus 200, plus 250 with all those things considered, like I just mentioned, for the first top 10 of the year. I mean, I know he has success at this track, but I will be fading Eric Jones in this one. If he's in a head-to-head, then I won't be taking it, but I'm just not betting that number. What do you think about that?
So Eric Jones is tough because, like you said, this is his best race, and back injuries are tough. I mean, even those, we saw Alex Bowman deal with some back injuries last year, and it just took him a little while to get going. I'm not going to fade Jones. I'm just going to avoid Jones. So I'm not going to be getting in matchups where I'm betting against him unless the price point is extremely favorable, depending on the driver. But I want to see how Jones does this week before getting to the All-Star, and then Charlotte is when we can really have that assessment of 600 miles. How's your back doing? How you feeling going into that race? Because just because he had a bad injury or bad wreck at Talladega doesn't mean that he's not going to be okay after that. It might take him a little bit to get out of the car, regardless of how he finishes. So he might finish clean in 13th, might take him just a little bit as your back gets tight. So I'm going to avoid, not fade.
Okay, like that strategy there. Another driver that I had in mind that I
Mhm.
will be betting on this week, I believe, will be Noah Gragson at plus
Okay.
135 for a top 10. I feel like this is also one of his better tracks, just based off what we've seen in the Xfinity series. I mean, also keeping in mind, and this is something that I remembered at Kansas, honestly, because I mean, it is his first, I feel like, true season in the Cup
Mhm.
Series. Seeing his abilities to drive the race car, which I mean, I believe right now he's the best driver at Stewart-Haas Racing, and I also believe he's one of the top Fords. And I mean, it could call me crazy, but the results have been there. He's
Yeah.
finishing
Yeah.
ahead of Penske drivers on a consistent basis, and it's been a few good tracks for him. Sure, can he continue that success and momentum at Darlington? That's the only thing that concerns me. I feel like is because we talked about momentum and drivers having it, like Kyle Busch
Mhm.
and a Larson and a Buescher as well. But for Gragson, a little bit of inexperience. Could this be a situation that you see he's due for a potential
Oh,
mistake or unlucky finish there?
so he's due for I like okay. Um, that number for me
Hmm.
is something I'm gonna be holding off on because I
Okay.
feel like I might be able to get something better. I know what you said about the Fords. I totally get it. The Fords have been MIA, but Penske, something's going on with Penske. I mean, if you've been following anything with the IndyCar series and what's going on there's just a lot of stuff happening. Penske realized too that their team is, hey, we just need to be in the playoffs. And then from there, we can just attack some of these races. We'll be good to go. I still think that a lot of the Ford teams, but Penske in general, are trying to figure some stuff out. Gragson is hungry. He's coming back with vengeance. I mean, he's trying to figure out, all right, I got to really stay on the attack. Now, that can get you in trouble at a place like this where the
Hmm.
Darlington stripe, the lady in black can come out and get you. So I'm going to really be evaluating, and I'm hoping that the odds makers hear a lot of people talking about Gragson and start putting him up against drivers that they not wouldn't normally do. That
Hmm.
then I think is something we can come back and be in our favor. I love Noah. I hope he races well. I'm looking forward to connecting with him when I go down to Wilkesboro and Charlotte next week. But for this week, I think the odds are a little. Yeah, they went a little too far, I think.
Okay, that's good to know. And especially the ability to then not only know that, be aware of it, but potentially capitalize on matchups against him and
Yeah.
things like that is huge to note. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
think we covered it from the prop bets. The only one I'll throw out there now just to get ahead of it, potentially something that I could see is a top five from Martin Truex Jr., William Byron, both the plus 100 or plus 110 there. I figured I'd
Yep.
note that because I feel like that is good value right now. I think if more people see that at that plus money, that could go down to a minus, like we see Larson at minus
Mhm.
190 and Hamlin at minus 165. I don't know if, I think that's something to note there because I feel like with those two drivers and their success at this track, but also these types of tracks, that might go away as we get closer to practice and qualifying. But in terms of your favorite plays overall that we talked about, whether it's an outright winner, a prop bet, a head to head, or anything else
Mhm.
maybe we haven't said, what do you see on the board there that you want to let everyone know about you liking the most this weekend?
Well, I'm gonna stay with what I said on the show on the NASCAR Betting Preview Show, and you can get it on Bet365 minus 115. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and it's Buescher versus Wallace. And I like
Mm.
Buescher. I like that momentum factor. I like what they're doing. He races so well. He keeps his stuff together. He's not one that's going to be tearing up a whole bunch of stuff. So I know I'm going to get a good result out of Buescher, who's got some momentum. Bubba, he just cannot buy a bucket at all right now. I mean, credit to the team because last week, for anybody that watched the race and him getting in that accident, you thought his day was done. And then obviously
True,
the
true.
came out and flipped everybody, and he was able to maintain good position. Didn't get the finish maybe that they wanted, but this is just a team that's struggling. And I think the littlest thing for him that goes wrong could really be a detriment internally for him. And I'm gonna just keep the momentum factor going with a guy like Buescher, who I know and believe is gonna be a top 12 car. So, wherever you feel like Wallace then would net out, figure that. But I'm gonna stay with that. Bet 365, favorite play right now as a matchup with him in it.
Both important to note, neither driver has a throwback scheme for this weekend. I think
Oh,
I think that's I've at least I've so far because Bubba's still driving the McDonald's car, which I
Yep.
mean, how do you not give him a
I
nice
don't know.
throwback with,
That's an
you know?
iconic brand to the sport.
Mhm.
That would
Mhm.
so all right. That's
And
yeah.
but
That
oh, so here's something that plays in your favor
okay.
though. Despite Buescher not having a throwback scheme, he is in the fifth third bank. If I'm not mistaken, I think I
Oh,
saw
that's a
that on the paint
money.
scheme preview, and it's money, and it's
All right. So
money to
then there
get
you
into the
go.
bank.
What more do you need? You need money to buy fries, so you need Buescher to beat Wallace. So that I mean, we simplified it.
Lock it in. All right. Now, when we're on this talk of paint schemes, before we close things out,
Yeah.
which one is your favorite? You asked this question on the NASCAR Betting Preview
Yeah.
Show to all the guys, and I don't believe you said which one was your favorite. So
Oh,
I want to give you the opportunity. Maybe you did. Maybe I missed it, but
no,
I need to know.
so last night on the show, I was and everybody was talking, but I was wearing a throwback Terry Labonte 5 Kellogg's shirt, and so that what they did, Larson throwing that back to him with Terry Labonte, that's my favorite. I think that's the cleanest one. That's the best looking one. I was trying to think if there's Tyler Reddick's running like a throwback to Tim Richmond, I believe it is, but it's not the Tim Richmond like we traditionally remember when he was racing at Hendrick. That one's really cool. That looks like a retro car. I like that one. And I'm trying to think if there's any others that came to the top of my mind. The Alex Bowman throwback to Jimmy Johnson looks really cool. Like the Lowe's days. So those, I would say those three have been my favorite. I'm sure I'm missing one, but those three are my favorite.
No, I
You?
like that. No, okay. So for me, I like those picks. Larson, I think Larson's scheme. I will note. I feel like that just adds. Like I
Yeah,
see that, and I'm like, okay, that's going to win the race. Like that just
I like
one of
that.
those ones
Yeah,
where it's like it's so
it
good.
has to.
It
It
had
has to hit.
exactly. For me, maybe a little bit of gold bias, but Austin Dillon's 3 car got the gold best
Good
pro
point.
shops.
I knew I
Throwback to
forgot
Dale
one.
Earnhardt there. Love that one. And I mean, I was growing up Dale Jr. fan. Loved when he won the Daytona
Mm,
500 with the Chase Elliott throwing it back
yep.
to that one. Gold number as well. The red, white, and blue, the gold, all compiled together. There's some great ones out there, and I feel like that only helps their ability to potentially win the race. So, Derek, thanks so much again for coming on.
Yeah.
Glad we were able to talk best bets, paint schemes, NASCAR, and everything in between here on this show. Always a
Yeah.
pleasure having you on. Let the people know where they can follow you at and all the shows and schemes you got working out with Frontstretch. Everything's going on great there. Where can they find you at the racetrack when you are going to be there?
Mm-hmm.
Share it all with us now.
Yeah, appreciate it. So best way to find me and connect with me at Derek Yoder _ on X is the best way to get a hold of me. But like you said, I mean, director of partnerships for Frontstretch, and I'll be at numerous races coming up. I think my schedule is about 12 or 13 more races from here through Phoenix and in November. So a lot happening. If you see me at the track or any of the Frontstretch reporters, make sure you stop by, say hello. We always appreciate that, and appreciate you having me on and your followers and your fans as well, Tino. So thanks again for having me, and looking forward to seeing what happens this weekend at Darlington.
Me too. All right. Well, best of luck. And, I like everyone. Remember, if you see Derek, give him a shout out. Say, follow him on social media. Say
I
hi
don't
to him at
bite.
the racetrack.
Yeah,
No, he doesn't bite. He only makes money.
that part's true.
That'll do it for this week's episode of Through the Gears. Thanks so much again to Derek Yoder for coming on the show. He provided so much great strategy advice, betting insight, and I loved our conversations about the current state of NASCAR and the racing that we're seeing on a consistent basis. Be sure to follow him at Derek Yoder _ there on all platforms, and especially with his work with Frontstretch and everything like that. He is a major part of what makes this company and organization successful, and everything that goes on behind the scenes. Derek is always at these tracks and putting in the work, and he really means a lot to me in terms of our friendship, but also everything that he's been able to do for the NASCAR betting community and for the NASCAR community as a whole. So really appreciate Derek for coming on the show, taking the time here. So be sure to follow him and support him wherever you can at Derek Yoder _ on socials. And while you're there, you can follow me as well at Tino Pattigno. I'll be dropping some clips from this show and from some of my other programs I got going on, and social content as well, as we get ready and we get set to make some money at Darlington Raceway this weekend. And of course, be sure to tune in to the Stock Car Scoop from Frontstretch and the Frontstretch Podcast Network there. I'll be sure that you're locked in and loaded, because everything you need to know leading up to this race and after the race will be there on the Front Stretch Podcast Network. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know who you think is going to win the race this weekend at Darlington. And I'll see you guys next week as we go through the gears.